All right, let's jump right in. We're going to look at one of the biggest miscalculations in military history.
A really disastrous one.
We're talking about a conflict that went on for 6 years, from 1807 to 1813. It's called the Peninsular War.
And this is where Napoleon Bonaparte, a guy who had basically conquered all of continental Europe, he ran into a problem he couldn't solve.
And that problem was people, just the sheer will of the Spanish and Portuguese people.
Right. Our mission today is to really get into how this whole thing became such a disaster for the French Empire.
How does a huge military superpower get worn down by, well, a combination of local resistance and a totally new way of fighting?
And that failure got a nickname that really sticks.
The Spanish ulcer. It's such a perfect description. Why that name?
Well, think about it. An ulcer isn't like a big, sudden wound. It's this deep, painful sore that just drains your strength over a long, long time.
Over months and years.
Exactly. And that's what Spain and Portugal did to Napoleon's army. It wasn't one massive, decisive battle. It just bled his empire constantly of its most important resources.
So things like veteran soldiers, money.
Hundreds of thousands of his best soldiers, huge amounts of money, and, his reputation, his prestige.
So if it was so obviously draining, why did Napoleon even start it? I mean, what was the real reason for invading Spain and Portugal?
It started with an economic war, really, a huge squeeze play against his #1 enemy, Great Britain.
Okay.
Napoleon's main goal is to defeat Britain, not with an army, but by strangling its economy. He set up something called the Continental System.
Which was basically trying to force every single country in Europe to stop trading with the British.
Precisely. It was a massive economic blockade. The idea was, if no one in Europe buys British goods, their economy just collapses.
But there was a weak link.
There was Portugal. They were Britain's oldest ally, and they just openly refused to comply. They kept their ports wide open to British ships. And to Napoleon, that was just unacceptable.
So he decides he has to force them. He sends his troops, and in 1807, they marched straight through Spain, which was supposed to be an ally on their way to Portugal.
That was the first step. But here comes the catastrophic mistake. Once his army was already in Spain, Napoleon decided, well, this is too good an opportunity to miss.
He double-crossed them.
Completely. He turned on the Spanish royal family, forced them out, and put his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne.
You can't just do that. I mean, putting a Frenchman on the throne of Spain, that's the perfect recipe to just ignite national fury.
And it did, instantly. For the Spanish people, this wasn't just politics. It was a deep personal insult to their national pride, to their religion, to their whole way of life.
So the reaction was immediate.
Oh, yeah. Resistance just exploded everywhere, all at once. The French suddenly had to fight for every single mile of ground.
But how do you do that? How does an unorganized population fight back against the best, most professional army in the world? You don't have cannons or cavalry.
And that's where the whole military landscape changes. This is where we get the concept that really defines this war.
Guerrilla warfare.
The key innovation. The word guerrilla literally means little war in Spanish. And it describes this method of fighting where small, mobile groups take on a much larger, conventional army.
And they avoid big, open battles.
They avoid them completely. Their main advantage wasn't training or equipment. It was simply knowing the neighborhood better than the invaders.
Right. These French soldiers were from all over Europe. They're wearing these bright uniforms sticking to the main roads.
Exactly. But the guerrillas, they were local farmers, laborers. They knew every single rugged hill, every hidden cave, every secret mountain pass. The terrain was their shield and their best weapon.
So the French army is this giant, slow battleship. The guerrillas are like hundreds of tiny, fast speedboats zipping around it.
That's a great way to put it.
What were their tactics specifically? How do they actually attack?
Their whole focus was on attrition and creating chaos. And they did that mainly through the ambush.
Okay, so no lining up in a field.
No, never. They'd hide, behind rocks or in the woods, especially along those narrow valley passes you mentioned earlier, those natural bottlenecks.
And when a French convoy or a patrol comes through,
they'd open fire from all sides, from hidden positions. The attack was fast, brutal, and over in minutes.
And they weren't just shooting randomly. They were very selective.
Right. Very. They would specifically target the officers who were easy to spot, take out the leader, and the unit falls into chaos. They also went for supplies, ammunition, communication equipment, not necessarily killing every last soldier.
Because before, the French soldiers who were left Could even figure out where the shots came from.
The guerrillas were gone. They just vanished, melted back into the forests or into the local villages where they could just blend right in.
And that blending in part was genius, wasn't it?
It was crucial. Guerrillas didn't wear uniforms. One minute a man is a farmer in a field, the next he's part of an ambush, and an hour later he's a farmer again. The French couldn't tell who the enemy was.
That must have been psychologically devastating.
It made their whole strategy fall apart. They tried to track them down, of course. They sent out patrols. They swept through villages.
But every soldier doing that is a soldier who isn't guarding a road or fighting the main British army.
That's the point. This constant harassment forced the French to dedicate hundreds of thousands of men at its peak, over 300,000, just to guard their own supply lines and maintain basic security. It was an incredible drain on their resources.
Let's talk about the life of an average French soldier in Spain. It sounds miserable. In other wars, they'd live off the land, right?
That system completely broke down in Spain. The Spanish rebels used a scorched earth policy.
So they'd destroy their own stuff to keep it from the French.
Exactly. Farmers would burn their own crops, drive their own livestock into the mountains. They would rather starve themselves than let the invaders take their food. So the French troops were constantly hungry.
Which means all their food had to come on wagons from France, hundreds of miles away.
And those slow-moving supply convoys were the #1 target for the guerrillas. It was an endless logistical nightmare.
The communication problem alone is just staggering.
It really is. I mean, think about sending a simple message from one general to another. Messengers were captured so often that a commander might have to assign a huge escort.
How huge?
Sometimes up to 200 cavalrymen, 200 soldiers just to protect one guy carrying one letter. That's how dangerous it was.
So you've got constant danger, you're hungry, and then there's the terrain and the heat of the Spanish summer. Morale must have just plummeted.
It was destroyed. These soldiers were used to quick, decisive victories in places like Italy or Austria. In Spain, they were just always on edge, hunted by enemies they couldn't see, and they could feel the hostility from every single local person.
And the king Napoleon put in charge, his brother Joseph, he wasn't helping things.
Not at all. He was so unpopular they nicknamed him King Bottle because of rumors about his heavy drinking. He had no control.
So this little war was being fought by who exactly? Who were these fighters?
The backbone of the entire resistance was just ordinary people. The Spanish peasantry, farmers, shepherds, laborers. They left their fields and formed these local fighting groups in the mountains.
And their motivation was really deep.
Oh, yeah. It went way beyond politics. They felt the French were a threat to their homes, their Catholic faith, their entire traditional way of life.
And this was a whole community effort, not just the men with guns.
Absolutely not. Women were completely essential to the whole thing. They were the spy network. They carried messages. They brought food and medical supplies to the hidden camps.
So every village was effectively part of the resistance.
It was, which meant the cost was immense. Entire villages were destroyed. Life was incredibly hard, but their spirit just everted it. It never broke. It showed how hard it is to conquer a population that simply refuses to be ruled.
And then this internal uprising gets a massive boost from the outside. Great Britain decides to get involved.
This is what turns it from a messy occupation into a full-blown two-front war for Napoleon.
Britain sends in a big army led by a general who would become legendary, Sir Arthur Wellesley.
Who we know better as the Duke of Wellington.
And Wellington shows up with a huge advantage.
The British Navy. They ruled the seas. That meant the British could land troops anywhere on the coast. They could resupply their army easily. It was a logistical advantage the French, who were stuck inland, could never hope to match.
And the British didn't just fight their own battles. They basically funded the resistance.
Yes. They sent officers to supply weapons, provide some training, and most importantly, they sent money to the Spanish guerrilla groups. That kept the little war going, constantly draining the French.
So now France is fighting two wars at once, a conventional war against the disciplined British and Portuguese armies, and this invisible, unending guerrilla war.
And Wellington was brilliant. He knew he couldn't beat the much larger French armies in a straight-up fight, not at first. So he focused on defense and attrition.
Which brings us to the lines of Torres Vedras.
An incredible feat of military engineering. In 1809, Wellington built these 3 massive interlocking lines of defensive forts north of Lisbon. He was protecting his main supply port. He basically built an impenetrable wall. He dared the French to attack it, knowing they couldn't break through and that they would starve waiting outside because they were so far from their own supply bases.
Putting them right where the guerrillas could pick them apart.
Precisely. It was a strategic masterpiece.
And while Wellington is being so careful and strategic, the French leadership is just a mess.
A complete mess. Napoleon's generals in Spain were constantly arguing, they hated each other, and Napoleon himself, the one person who could unite them, was busy.
He was busy with other things,
Yeah.
like preparing to invade Russia in 1812.
Right, and this is where you see how the Spanish ulcer was so critical. When Napoleon marched on Moscow, he desperately needed his best, most experienced soldiers.
Where were they?
A huge number of them, his finest veterans, were stuck in Spain. Those 300,000 men holding Spain down were the very troops he leaded on the Eastern Front. You could say the price of failing in Spain was paid in the snows of Russia.
Let's also talk about the geography. You mentioned it earlier. The land itself was an enemy to the French.
Spain and Portugal are not easy places to move a large army. It's all high mountain ranges, dry plateaus, deep rivers, and those narrow passes we talked about.
Perfect for ambushes.
Perfect for ambushes, and terrible for a conventional army that relies on heavy cannons and huge supply wagons. The roads were bad, so everything moved incredibly slowly.
Which meant the French army was often broken up into smaller groups that couldn't support each other.
Yes, and on top of that, water was often scarce. Just marching was exhausting and deadly. Geography was as much a weapon for the Spanish as guns were.
So after 6 years of this grinding, draining conflict, how did it finally end? How did the Allies manage to cut out the ulcer?
By 1813, the French position was just collapsing. Wellington had built up his army, he'd coordinated with the guerrillas, and he was pushing the French relentlessly back towards their own border.
And the final, decisive blow was the Battle of Vittoria.
In June of 1813, yes, Vittoria was a massive, crushing victory for Wellington. It just shattered what was left of the French army's morale. Joseph Bonaparte fled Spain for good.
And the retreat was a total disaster for the French.
A total mess. They abandoned almost everything, their cannons, their equipment, and famously huge amounts of stolen art and treasure as they just scrambled to get back across the Pyrenees Mountains.
And the war didn't stop there. The Allies chased them right into southern France.
Which just added even more pressure on Napoleon, who was already losing badly in Germany. The drain from the Spanish ulcer finally became too much for his empire to handle.
The legacy of this war is just huge.
It's massive. It proved Napoleon wasn't invincible. It gave hope to other countries under French rule, like Prussia, and inspired their own national uprisings.
And the impact spread far beyond Europe. The war crippled Spain as a global power.
That's a key long-term effect. With Spain's government in chaos for 6 years, its colonies in Central and South America saw their chance. The Peninsular War was the catalyst for the independence movements that led to the collapse of the Spanish Empire.
So really the big takeaway from all this is that technology and numbers aren't always enough. You can't conquer a population that is completely united against you. It was a perfect storm of Wellington's conventional army pinning the French down.
While the guerrillas just relentlessly attacked their lifeblood, their supplies, and their communications. And every time you hear about modern conflicts with insurgents or irregular fighters, you should think back to those Spanish peasants. The very word we use, guerrilla, is their direct legacy.
Good luck with your studies.